Hi, I'm Zach. Sometimes before I like to invest a lot of time and money in a project, I like to inexpensively pre-make a project. Helps me learn, but something that I've always wanted was a realistic Darth Vader lightsaber. That being said though, there's so many different variations of this thing throughout the movies that it's sometimes kind of hard to know what you like and you don't like until you're holding it in your hands and it's right in front of you. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's get started on our Darth Vader inspired lightsaber. This project turned out way cooler than I expected. The process was started with a 1 1/4 inches chromed sink drain pipe that was left over from a Luke Return of the Jedi lightsaber build I did last summer. Anyone who has 3D printed chrome or metal pipe knows that it just never quite looks right, not without a lot of work. So anyways, next on the list, some high quality 3D files were needed to be located that could easily be scaled to the diameter and length of the pipe. None of the files were exact as far as accuracy, but some files were found that would work perfect for this project. Some light math and a quick test print later, all of the parts were found to fit perfectly. Time to commit. All of the resized files were fit on the print bed in an orientation that would make printing and finishing the easiest. The 3D printer was warmed up to a toasty 200 degrees Celsius and started. While the 3D printer was working its magic, I started getting ready to cut the chrome pipe. The metal cutting blade was dusted off in the garage and brought down to the shop along with the saw. After the blades were changed out, the pipe was measured and cut to the exact lengths of the actual prop. Now, it is possible to cut these drain pipes with a handsaw, and I know, trust me, because I've done it several times now, but good luck getting a perfect 90-degree angle. Trust me. Good news, the 3D printed parts are done, and the parts fresh off of the printer were cleaned up with flush cutters and a Dremel. The pommel blocks printed on the bed with guides meant to assist the placement if I were to have printed the chrome cylinders. The excess plastic off of the pommel blocks were sanded down using the excess pipe as a guide for the correct curvature. The grinding stone bit was used on the pipe burrs and what was left of the uneven edges. A couple dabs of Goo Gone were applied to the stickers on the pipe and then scraped off. I stacked up the finished pieces and thought to myself, if only this lightsaber had an exposed crystal. Oh wait, I can do that. Let's get started. I recently watched an amazing video in which a fully 3D printed Sith lightsaber had the ability to be disassembled to the crystal core, and to my absolute delight, I found the files containing the crystal core chamber. 2 of these crystal chambers were scaled and printed, one to play with, the other to be installed. It was around this time that I kinda had to figure out how much space I was going to need in the bottom half section in order to fit the battery and the rest of the components. There is not enough space in the pommel for 2 AA batteries and the housing, but luckily there was enough space to enclose a 9-volt battery. The LED string that I planned on using was now, in retrospect, extremely creepily tested to make sure that all 10 LEDs illuminated, and to your absolute viewing displeasure, they certainly did. The 3D files that were printed were not meant to be used in the way that I planned, meaning in order to route the wires through the parts, holes need to be drilled in a way that could be hidden. After the holes were drilled, the printed pieces were cleaned off with isopropyl alcohol. Each piece was hot glued up with popsicle sticks, then brought out to the garage for a coat of primer, sanding, and paint. Anyways, the glued up body pieces were sprayed with their initial coat of primer, then set on the bench to dry. The buttons and accessory pieces were sprayed with a metallic copper paint. I debated with myself what a good base coat for the crystal chamber would be, and you can't really go wrong with a metallic silver. Honestly, we'll probably be touching it up later anyways. Finally, the pommel blocks were painted with a black appliance epoxy in the event that it would be handled. Here's a quick shot of how the situation was looking after the first coat. All of the colors that I sprayed were given one more coat, then the sanding began. All of a sudden, tragedy struck. I was test fitting 2 pieces together when suddenly, the emitter shroud snapped into 2 pieces in my hands. I was heartbroken. Nah, I'm just kidding around. I actually took my rubber mallet and just easily tapped the emitter shroud back to where it needed to be. A dab of super glue later, and we were back in business. The freshly sanded pieces were then cleaned off again and glued back up for paint. A nice even coat of flat black paint was applied at this time. All of the paint slowly, and I'll reiterate, really slowly dried in the cold garage. Honestly, the cold was kind of messing up the drying process, so it was decided at this time not to apply any more coats of primer and paint. After everything fully dried again, all of the pieces were brought down to the shop to be dismounted from the popsicle sticks and cleaned for the lightsaber assembly. Do you ever just dry assemble your pieces and imagine what could be? I certainly do. In order to plumb the wires through the 3D pieces, mount the LEDs, and have some red light shine in the correct places, holes were drilled throughout the parts to open up the previous holes and make new ones for the wire plumbing. A few holes were drilled into the metal pipe, then evened out with my rotary tool. The top couple LEDs of a red LED light string were then glued to the inside of the emitter shroud, then spread throughout the inside of the metal pipe that was just modified. The AA battery housing was desoldered from the negative and positive wires, then carefully slid through the 3D printed midsection for further assembly. The emitter, metal pipe, and midsection were carefully glued together with superglue. After the glue dried, a single LED from the strip was mounted on one half of the crystal holding chamber, then glued to the center end of the midsection. Something was telling me that Katie was getting bored around this time. Since Katie is the only force sensitive in our household, I sent her on a quest outside to find a kyber crystal, and to my absolute surprise, she found the perfect one almost immediately. But seriously, we'll be using a clearish piece of quartz that we found in the rock bed as a kyber crystal. Kind of looks a little bit like this. It should look pretty sweet, illuminated from both sides. The crystal was locked into the chamber with the end cap. A single red LED was then glued into the center of the end cap and temporarily soldered into the circuit until I figured out what I wanted to do with the exposed wires. It's kind of a crap dark video, but here's an idea of how things were looking around this time. I added a couple resistors that I had on hand to my 9-volt battery and tested everything out with my meter. Everything was looking and testing great, but while I was sitting there, I just couldn't help but wonder what the lightsaber would look like with a pulsating, flickering effect. Why make my life easy anyways? I had a leftover, actually I had a couple, leftover flickering Halloween candles that would work perfect in this scenario. I disassembled a candle and pulled the flickering LED out of it. The resistance was changed and the LED was soldered at the beginning of the circuit. The lightsaber looked kinda cool, but I was still kind of unsure of the effect. I continued the build at this time, thinking to myself, we could always take the flickering LED out later. The exposed wires were glued to the side of the crystal chamber in a way that I found to be a little more visually appealing. A dab of hot glue was applied to the bottom of the crystal chamber so that nothing would short circuit. The 9-volt battery was then glued to the bottom of the chamber. The resistors, a small switch, and the flickering LED were then glued to the sides of the 9-volt battery as to make space to slide the assembly into the pommel. This was kind of my last chance to change my mind if I didn't like the flickering LED, and yeah, I wasn't a big fan. After watching it for a while, I decided to remove the flickering LED from the beginning of the circuit and add it to the end of the circuit so that the crystal still had a little bit of flickering. Everything was then re-glued and re-soldered back into place. A couple pieces of tape were used to cover up what I felt would be the problem spots in the internal pommel assembly. Finally, the metal pipe that we'll be using as the pommel was cleaned off with some isopropyl alcohol. Hot glue was used to attach the pommel blocks to the pommel, and a dab or two of super glue was applied to the knobs and accessory switches so that they could be fixed into place as well. A variety of silver, copper, and black paint was used to touch up the areas that were showing build wear. After everything dried, I would say that we finally have our completed build. Let's just move straight into the glamour shots. Hey! Thank you so much for hanging out with me and checking out my video. My Darth Vader inspired lightsaber was so much fun to build. I had an awesome time. I think I have a really good idea of what I want when I either build another actual replica or find one out there in the wild. So like, comment, subscribe, tell a friend, do all of those things. And then also, if you have not checked out my portal turret video that I recently did, you should go check out my portal turret video. That's cool. That was a lot of fun. Got a real working laser. How can you go wrong? But honestly, I think that's about it. So really, until next time, we'll see you later.